Help, Rob. There's too many therapy websites with hands holding dirt with a plant growing out of it. Which therapist should I choose? We'll talk about that today on the Manspace. Welcome to the Manspace Podcast. We're your hosts, Doctors Matt Brown and Rob Porter, and clinical therapist Mike Porter. Mike, welcome us now again.
Oh, okay. Welcome, spacemen.
You sucked all the air out of the spaceship.
See, I can't do a two for Rob.
It's so funny because you just did it.
I know. And then I built this. No, like I've become painfully aware this last 2 weeks of my when and how self-conscious I get about things. And I was like, I sent a text today and then felt the need at the end to be like, so I hope that makes sense. And I thought, of course, I read through it. I knew it made sense. Why on earth am I having to throw that disclaimer in?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so that, anyway, I was like, wow. So it's been unpleasant. We'll just say that. Being this aware of my insecurities about crap. I'm like, oh, this sucks. Tired of this.
I was going to say, does it go up for you when you're in a new environment, new people?
Well, so that's the funny thing. Yes, typically, but this was some guy that I've been working with for a year.
Oh,
so it's not like we know each other really well. We've got a pretty good relationship going. And so I think, no, that should have been an easy conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. I still felt the need to.
I think it's fascinating the way we get in our heads about stuff like that. Conducting meetings in church actually is there's times where I feel like Mike on the microphone. I'm like, welcome, spaceman.
It's the agenda, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's the fact that
if someone said just get up there and welcome us,
right,
you'd probably be fine. But I hated the agenda too.
Yeah, so I'm supposed to hit certain things, and it's like, oh crap, I was supposed to. Okay, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, boys, here's what's going to have to happen on the show. I'm going to ask a question, and then you guys are going to have to just kind of take this. And finally, the fans will get what they want, a little less Rob on the show.
Bouncing in and out. I will say before you even introduce the topic, though, maybe this is an actual real-life embodiment of good couples therapy, because if you're the therapist and me and Mike are the couple, the majority of the talking will happen between the two of us and not with you.
That's true. That's good. Because, here's what I was going to say. This is what's happening is this is different than what we've had before. Sometimes it'll just get slow, but this will actually kick me out and say you don't have internet connection about every 5 minutes.
But you do the whole time, right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
That is weird.
There's no good answer. So the question is, as Matt just alluded to, because who knows how this session. See, I'm in the headspace. Matt's right. This is good couples therapy. See, now Matt's frozen on me, but Mike's not.
I'm here.
I believe you. It's fine. I'm the one who's messed up. I'm Taylor Swift in this scenario. So here's my question that I'm going to spit out with its various things before I get kicked out. One is, because people have asked me various times, whether it's a client I'm seeing and I'm referring them to somebody else, or family or friends, often friends saying, hey, I need to find a therapist. Can you help me pick one? If it's not somebody I can send to them. So I want to know what you think people should be looking for when they're looking for a good therapist. And I want to know then how you decide on that therapist, how you decide this is the one I want. I guess it's maybe the same thing. But then lastly, what does good couples therapy look like? What should you expect from your therapist to a degree? Because I think movies get it totally wrong 90% of the time.
And he's gone. But before I answer the question, let me just say, I'm hearing bumping Latin music from La Michoacana, which means it's probably grand opening day.
Open.
Woo! Finally, I've got tacos across the parking lot.
I was gonna say, I guess you guys know where you're eating when Rob comes down next time.
Yeah, man,
La
it's only been 2 years.
Dude, I never thought they were gonna open that place.
So if you're listening, it'll be a week after, but La Michoacana on Bay Area Boulevard in Clear Lake now
open.
Sounds like they're open.
Come eat tacos.
So he said, basically, how do you find, decide on, and work with a good couples therapist? You want to go first?
Well, I mean, because my initial thought was like, you could almost start by just saying what makes a good therapist, except there is like, I know people that I think are great individual therapists, but they're not sure how to manage the couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, no, just because you're a good therapist doesn't mean you'll be a good couples therapist. So you are looking for something different.
Mm-hmm.
Right. For me, I wonder if we're going to get two black screens.
He multiplies every time he comes back.
It's so rad. We're going to have like so many screens of Rob by the time, and most of them will just be black screens.
I don't know if you heard any of that, dude. Every time you come back, your black screens multiply. So now you have 2.
Sweet. Well, keep going, boys, because I think I have about a minute and a half each time.
Real quick, you'll hear
Yeah.
it when the episode comes out. I just shared some exciting news right as you dropped.
Dang it!
It was good.
I have to wait?
Yep.
I'll do a real quick recap, but I hear bumping Latin music from across the parking lot, which means La Michoacana is probably open today.
I can't wait to go get tacos. All right, go ahead.
For me, I think the first thing that to look for in a therapist is how you think like is fit. Personality.
How do you determine that?
That's the thing. It is really hard to determine. I was talking to a kid the other day and he was asking me about marketing. And I said, yeah, my website's really important. And I said, because it's the only way people really have to get to know me before they engage on some level with me is through my website. And so if my website is unappealing, then they're not going to want to engage. I think this is something we've all done. We try to make our website sound very conversational. Mm-hmm. And each of us, I think, has an ability to write with a strong voice that is reflective of our personalities. And so that comes through. Short of that, like if someone's saying, hey, this guy's really good, well, then most therapists will offer, hey, you can call up for a, free 15-minute consult, right? Like call up and ask questions. And that kind of becomes your first shot to really get to know them, I guess. But so that's always one of the first things to me, like you can overcome a lot if there's a good fit with the therapist. And there's stuff that won't ever happen if there's not. Like, I think I've shared this before. When my wife was working with a therapist, they asked a question and she wasn't truthful in her answer. And she caught herself with it and was like, oh man, this might not be a good fit. And when she told me, I go, yeah, you need to find a new therapist. Like clearly after however many sessions it had been, you're not comfortable opening up to this person. And so if you don't see a way there, then yeah, you should probably politely end it and go somewhere else, which she did. And she's found a much better fit for her. So that's always kind of the first thing I look at is personality fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess if we're talking right now about how do I find one, right? And yeah, I think best case scenario, you're working with a therapist who's recommending couples therapy and they can give you a referral because you're already getting that information from someone you trust. Or if you have a friend who is, who's worked with somebody or knows somebody. But specifically, like, because we're talking about couples therapy, like, be asking for a good couples therapist. And then if you're just like cold calling, really it's just a lot of like sorting through directories. So just Googling like couples therapist near me. And then like you're saying, I generally think like there's a correlation between quality of photo and like website copy and all of that. And that person's ability to like connect with people, understand people, talk to people. So I think, as you're looking, there's like some people that are looking more like I'm good with anybody, but I know my spouse or partner's really hesitant about this whole process anyway. So who would they be most comfortable with? And sometimes that's like based on gender or age or, life experience or whatever. But I think going with your gut is really important because you'll kind of know. And then there's all the ins and outs, obviously, of insurance and things like that. But best case scenario, you've got somebody you trust who's saying, I would recommend this person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll chime in if I can. We'll see what happens. I do think, I think fit matters. I think personality matters more than people think it does, which is why I think when you guys talk about like copy and photo, like seeing that someone put effort into a website and kind of looking for, do I think I could hang out with this person?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a weird way to phrase. That's a starting point for me. Like, are you somebody that I feel like I could talk to? So like you said, Mike, my website's very conversational. That's the way I talk. So you're going to see that in my therapy room. But I also think if I moved into something like education, like I would even say, if you're looking for good couples therapy, I generally say, this is not always the case and there are exceptions, but I generally say license wise, I would tell people to look for LMFT, a licensed marriage and family therapist first. Although I've known plenty of good couples therapists who are LCSWs or LPCs or whatever state license is for psychologists, depending on where they're at.
Well, and I was going to say some of these change depending on where you live. Like I don't think they're not LPCs here and they're not LCSWs. Mm-hmm. So basically, just to clarify what those two things are, one is just a professional counselor. And it's the title will be something, right? LPC stands for licensed professional counselor and LCSW is licensed clinical social worker. So right. And basically it's the social worker, that's their background is in social work. And the LPC, theirs is in their background is going to be more psychology based. Whereas with LMFTs, it's what it sounds like, marriage and family therapist. Like we are trained specifically to look at things that way, which is, I think, the benefit, right, of looking for an LMFT first. Is it's not to say that the LPC, like they will evolve. Like I know a lot of LPCs, and they've all taken classes that kind of expose them to couple work and to family therapy ideas, to that way of thinking, but it's not their base system, right? Where for us, that's like every class I took, the question always came back to, okay, but like, how does this apply to a family? How does this, how do you look at this relationally? Mm-hmm. And they were always pushing us to see it from that point of view, which shifts the way you think about things. It's hard for me to have conversations. Like when I work individually with people, I'm always wanting to know, like, well, what do you think it's like for your wife or for your kid or for whoever it is, right? Because I'm trying to understand that relational dynamic.
Yeah.
So I do think from just an education standpoint, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think also like, I'll explain it sometimes to people where I kind of describe that as part of your education, you have to complete so many clinical hours, and an MFT is already going to have, depending on whether they're a master's level or a doctoral level.
Yeah.
They're going to have like half of the hours they had to complete absolutely had to be with couples or families.
Yep.
And then to become licensed, same thing.
Same thing.
At the very least, if you're working with a fully licensed person, they have done 1,000 hours of working with couples and families. Whereas, other people, obviously, like we said, other people do great work with couples too, but just one thing to consider. And it doesn't mean that just because you've done 1,000 hours with couples and families that you are the right fit. It just is one more piece of information. Yeah.
Right. And it is something to consider, right? Like, and that's the thing with all of this, there is no nope, this is the one thing, nothing else matters. Mm-hmm. No, it's all just pieces of information to consider as you're looking. Mm-hmm. But I had forgotten about that. Like if you to graduate from an MFT program, I needed way more hours, way more clinical hours than anyone I was working around that had a different degree. Mm-hmm. Like LPCs, LCSWs, they did not need the clinical hours I needed to be able to get fully licensed or to be able to graduate even. Yeah. And so, there is, again, something to be said for the training that we undergo.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think, like if you're thinking about couples therapy, you can kind of gauge yourself based on these questions. Mm-hmm. I would say in my experience, like 75% of the work that happens in couples therapy is de-escalation and getting out of a blaming cycle.
Yeah.
And So you can kind of gauge yourself as you're thinking about it. A lot of people ask like, well, how long is this going to take? What does it look like? It's like, well, what do your fights look like?
Mm-hmm.
Are they super frequent and intense? Can you tolerate sitting down and talking at all about any of your problems, or does it immediately escalate? And are you stuck thinking about your partner as the primary source of the problem, or as yourself as the primary source of the problem, and your partner thinks the same thing, right? Like that's not necessarily just because you're thinking the same way, it doesn't necessarily help. But and then like as you're interviewing, maybe like you said in a consultation call or something, I also think any successful couples therapy addresses these three concerns, but the degree to which they need to be addressed depends on the couple and their situation. But first and foremost, why are we here? It's kind of the first question, right? And then how well developed and balanced is our understanding of how we got here? And how clear are we on how we're going to get to where we want to go? And I think that generally speaking, partners come in at like different levels of readiness or urgency about those questions. So one person might be saying, we really need to talk about what got us here, right? And the other person's saying, well, we really need to focus on where we're trying to get to. And then what's happening right now, what's bringing us in is we're fighting all the time about that, right? So each one of those questions needs attention, but finding a way to talk about them in a de-escalated, non-blaming way, I think really makes a huge difference in how quickly it goes, how successful it is.
Well, and it's interesting because I think back to when I was first starting out, both as an intern and then as an associate therapist, and I would often let my clients argue. And so I'm curious, like in the realm of, because you talked about de-escalating, right? So in the realm of what would be considered, I guess, good therapy in the room, how much do you think that should be allowed?
Not a lot. And again, it depends on every couple, but I think in my opinion, watching it is helpful for the therapist to get a sense of how this plays out.
Yeah.
And I think it also is a gauge of how open the couple is in the room, because if they fight like, crazy at home, but then they're just like all business in the session, it's like, well, we're not going to get anywhere. You got to bring some of this out. Right. But after me personally, after I've seen that and after I've learned what I need to from it, I will say like, I will pause and direct that and say, you can do this for free at home. Right. So what do you want to do? Like it's not going to get you where you want to be. And again, like in terms of de-escalation, oftentimes there are people that are like, but I just got to say this. And it's like, you can, but it's not going to go anywhere. And I'll maybe do a little back and forth like that. But I think I've had a lot of couples tell me like the last therapist we had just ended up being a referee, or just ended up like being a spectator, or and I think that does work for some people. Some people need to feel like they have the space to just work it out and somebody's lightly directing. It's just not my style.
Well, and that's one of the things that I've noticed I've changed as I've worked, because inevitably I think at some point, if you're doing couples work, again, unless they're really holding back, and we've all worked with those couples where it's like, you guys sit here and tell me everything's fine, so I don't know what we're doing. But for the most part, I think at some point, you're going to see some kind of a blow up in your office. I think we've all had clients where one of the couple gets up and walks out because they need to cool off. Like it's going to happen at some point. And so, like I said, when I was starting, I didn't know where to intervene. It was really hard. Now I've learned, and I'm still like I'm still honing this skill, but looking at it and saying and identifying the point where it no longer is productive. Right? Because a lot of times what they're saying, like they're obviously worked up, but I'm like, right, but they're speaking, and this is the first time they've spoken Like, these are the things I've been pretty sure they wanted to say, but they've been holding them back.
Yeah.
And so I'll let them come. And then when I find that point where I'm like, oh no, now it's shifting, right? Now it's shifting from I'm saying things to now I'm just blaming you for everything. Then I'm like, okay, we're done. And, but it's a tricky thing trying to learn like where to me, where the productivity is in that kind of argument, because there are a lot of things to learn from it. Like, I've had couples therapists be like, you just watched us fight. And I said, I learned a lot. Like, I did just watch you fight. You're right. And I like saw things that you guys had not told me were happening.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a beneficial 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I think back to my training program too, like where you video yourself back then with VHS tapes and rolling cart televisions. And I remember same thing, like a couple fighting and me not stopping it. And then the next session, me rolling the TV in there and saying, I want you guys to watch this. Right. And it was like, oh, like, I just remember her reaction, especially. She was like, I look horrible. Like, I can't believe I look at him that way and point at him that way and yell at him that way. Right. And he had his own issues in the conflict too. And I think actually her self-reflection was kind of indicative of, how the relationship was going. She was over functioning a ton, but I think when you can see it, right, it's like, yeah, it's not who I want to be. And we don't get that view. So that is one thing I think that is beneficial for a therapist to see. But I've wondered recently, I'm like, maybe I should sign some consent and just let, have people let me record some of that stuff, because like when you see it, it takes you out of that place in your own mind where all you're thinking about is like, I know why I feel this way. I know what you've done to me. And so everything I'm doing right now feels right. But when you have some time away from it, all you really get to do without video or audio is just look back on the moment and say, well, no, I was just really mad and I, said what I was feeling. But it's like, do you know how you said it? Do you know what your voice or what your face looked like? And when you can see that, it's like, especially after you've calmed down and you can look back on it, you're like, ooh, is that how it looks? Right. And it's like, so I wondered about that actually during COVID, when we all had to start doing video stuff. I'm like, now everybody's going to see their faces when they're mad. Like, is that going to make any difference? I don't think it did, but I didn't point it out that way either. But again, I think that's all like around the same principle that when you're in a blaming cycle, you are not thinking about your behavior, right? When you de-escalate and you put like first all of your efforts into understanding your behavior so that you can then come back and like work together. Like, I can't think of a single successful couples therapy situation I've been in where that hasn't happened, where, somebody's gone to a place of really looking at their own behavior, both people, and then, owning that with each other, and then committing to, working together in the way that they want to moving forward. And I think so often it kind of feels like, well, we don't need that to get there. I just need to convince you that what you're doing is wrong and hurting me. Right. And then we'll get there. And there's like I can't think of a single case where that's worked, right? Never works. So, but it is like human nature just to feel like that's going to get us there. But really what it does is it gets you to a place of feeling like I'm justified. Yep. That felt good. But then, can you really honestly ask after that, like, what happened? It's kind of like that story I told a long time ago where I hit my friend over the head with a shovel, and he's like, ow! I'm like, hey, what happened, man? He's like, what are you talking about?
Well, and that's like I was having this conversation with a kid the other day where we were kind of talking about like, what is it, like what are these conversations about grade in school look like with your parents? And he kind of described, and I said, is it pretty much the same conversation every time? And he goes, yeah. And I said, okay, it's because your parents don't think you understand. And I said, do you pretty much say the same things trying to get them to understand? He goes, yeah. And I said, because you don't think they understand? He goes, no, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about the communication pattern, and I had to point out to him, I'm like, look, dude, I'm not giving you a way to get mom and dad to agree with you. That's not the point of this. Like, all I'm doing is trying to get you to a place where you feel like they understand. And I had to shift his mindset from this idea that if they understand, they'll agree.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And they'll see that I'm right. Because I think what you're describing is that kind of pattern where you have that one person in the couple where they'll sit and come back to it. Because somehow, if I can get them to see it right, then they'll think or they'll know that I'm right. And this will all go away. And so getting them to see, like, no, that's not how this is going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when the doors are closed, right? It's like,
right.
You're just banging on the door or installing another deadbolt and nothing's happening. Right. So that's where I think, like, when that kind of fighting is going on, the faster you can have somebody help you stop, the less like emotional and physical flooding you're dealing with as you're trying to come back down. Like, that's all that leads to, right? Is this big crescendo of physical and emotional flooding. And then you go to kind of like the worst tactics you have to try and keep it going. And then it's like sometimes really hard to recover. So, like, I think a good couples therapist will know that and will see where things are going and like give you multiple opportunities to pause before you get to that point so that you can kind of get back on track and oriented towards what you're actually trying to do, which is connect with your partner, right? It's like, either I want to connect to you by beating you over the head with my experience so that I can like crack your skull and get it in there somehow. Or I'm going to do what I think is the scariest thing for all of us, which is like, I actually have zero control over whether you decide to care enough about this.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it to you in a way that gives it the best shot of happening that way. And risk feeling the rejection, but then I think a good couples therapist helps you there too. Right. And says like, that does hurt. You still did the right thing, but maybe let's not jump right to like, I shouldn't have done this. I knew they would respond this way. It's because they're selfish. It's because they're uncaring. It's, like, let's give them an opportunity to kind of maybe like pace more with you emotionally and show up in the way that you need them to.
Rob leaving at the wrong moment just emptied my head. Well, oh crap. Well, I'm probably going to end up asking this other question, but I didn't want to leave this yet.
You were talking about understanding, and
I know, and I really can't, because I was focusing on what you were saying, and then Rob left, and it was too much apparently for my brain at once. It was a sweet moment for Mike. So I will ask this though, right? That's what I was going to say. I do think part of this, right? Like, if you should be comfortable enough with your therapist to be able to say, hey, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, if you don't think something's productive, or if you think maybe, your therapist is always siding with your spouse and never looking at it from your point of view, like, you should be able to say to your therapist, hey, this feels pretty lopsided. Like, I've been called out on that. Like, hey, Mike, it feels like you're just taking it from their side and believing everything they're saying. And I had someone else be, like I mentioned already, like, Mike, you just watched us fight. And the first time it happened, I was like, oh, and I got a little bit defensive, but then I realized, I was like, no, they should be able to say it. And two, I better understand why I let it happen. And so it helped me become more aware of why I was making the decisions I was making in session. Like, why am I letting this play out? What am I getting from it? But like I said, I think that is an important thing as you're doing things with your therapist, because a lot of what you just said, Matt, was you're doing these things ultimately communicating with your spouse, but no, the reason you're in therapy is so the therapist can kind of help you pace those things and identify things, right? Because especially as emotions increase, we tend to just, like, the more our emotions go up, the harder it is to control what's coming. And all of it just comes out, and that can get ugly, and we'll very quickly slide back into, negative or destructive communication patterns. And so helping, having your therapist there to kind of help you manage that is important. And if you don't feel like your therapist is doing it, you should be comfortable enough with them to be like, hey, I don't understand why you just watched all of this happen and didn't say a word.
Mm-hmm.
You should be comfortable enough with your therapist to be able to say that. And then, hopefully your therapist is confident enough that they have an answer for it.
Well, and no, that is a good point, because I think when you think about the therapist here, a good therapist will make a point to let you know that basically your relationship is my client.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I have to have good working relationships with each of you so that I can facilitate your relationship. But I might check in with you, especially after I'm really hard on you, right? I might let you know, like, hey, I'm still rooting for you, right? Like I see where you're coming from. And, but yeah, that is a common complaint, right? It's like, and that oftentimes is like kind of skewed by gender, right? Where it's like, if you are the odd gender, right, you might feel like, and I think that's sometimes where some of the women I've worked with have said, I think he'd feel more comfortable with a male, right? And I maybe don't feel like that's going to be an issue for me. But I think that as you're thinking about that working relationship, it ties into kind of the blame thing, right? So generally speaking, most relationship therapists are coming from a place of saying, it's not more one person's fault than the other. It's cyclical, right?
Uh-huh.
You're both contributing to it. So in a sense, blame doesn't really matter. Fault doesn't matter in the sense that we're, not going to be trying to find it to say, oh, here's the root cause, right? It's you.
Mm-hmm.
But there are more people now that, are maybe leaning toward writing the opposite of that. Terry Reel's one that comes to mind, where he's saying, like, I was trained that way, but now I'm comfortable saying, no, it's actually more your fault than it is your partner's, right?
Yeah.
And I think I get what he's trying to say. And I'm sure it works super well for him. But I guess the way I would view that is like, I think you can still get there without quantifying, right? Like you could just say, what are your contributions, right? And what are yours? And if we don't work on both of those, we won't get there. So even if you have a larger share of the problem, if we just like pulled you out and completely fixed you and plugged you back in, you wouldn't find that like gets you where you're wanting to go.
Right.
Because a lot of times partners will say, well, I'm just reacting to the thing that they have a problem with. Right. And while they're absolutely true in some cases, right, where it's just like, that is a reaction, right? But there's also things you've done and ways that you've been with your partner prior to that increases the escalation of those moments. And so you need to be curious about what it is that's going on for you and be committed to working on that. And when you take the contingency out of it, right, like we're both going to jump in at the same time, and I feel like there's a willingness on both parts, that's when I think that blame cycle and that escalation kind of comes down. Because if it's kind of like well, I'll do it if you do it, right? Or I'm not going to do it until I see enough of, you doing X, then that's, again, just a standoff where it's like, what somebody's saying in that case, and what a good couples therapist would point out is like, what you're saying to me then is that the only reason you're changing is the relationship. So as soon as the relationship's not rewarding to you anymore, that change goes out the window.
Right.
Like why are you changing, just because it's who you want to be versus, because my partner treats me this way, I'll do this. Right. So those are things I think that, like you're saying, that balance in the relationship, if you feel like you're on the compromised end of the relationship with the therapist, one, you need to be able to speak up, but also a good therapist is going to be checking in on that.
Right. No, and that was another hard thing when I was first learning, was identifying this idea of like, oh, it must feel lopsided. Like I can see it better now. Like I can tell when when one of the couple thinks I'm being too lopsided.
Yeah.
And so I'll kind of preemptively say, this is what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
This is why. I'm really interested in this idea of this guy who feels reels. Is that what his name is?
Terry Reel.
Yeah. Where he
Yeah.
says, I think you're wrong. And I was doing a quick scan through my head and be like, what's a situation when I would tell a couple, no, I think you're wrong and he's right or she's right or whatever. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that I thought where I could comfortably be like, well, yeah, he's wrong, was an affair.
Yeah. And I think like the 3 A's, right? Abuse, affair, and addiction. You could say like this thing that is like kind of on your side of the equation is having a disproportionate effect on your relationship. So until you address that, there's not going to be, you're
not going to find the balance you're looking for.
Yeah.
But see, and that's the funny thing is, even to me, I think, right, like your phrasing of it, it's having a disproportionate effect. And I think, right, because it's not the only thing impacting it.
Yeah.
Which I think is one of the big differences, right? This is why Rob was talking about, for the 10 seconds he was in here. This is why Rob was pointing out that, and we are biased in our thinking because we are, the three of us, all LMFTs.
Mm-hmm.
But we're trained to look at it from that viewpoint, right? It's not necessarily about here's where we are. It's about, part of it is how did we get here?
Yeah.
What patterns exist that, because it's a long shot. Somebody just wakes up and is like, you know what? Today I'm just going to drive my marriage to the crapper and go have an affair.
Yeah.
Like no one wakes up and does that.
Mm-hmm.
They get to that point. Now I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying, like, to me, I think no. And typically when I work with infidelity in those cases, I'll always push the one that was unfaithful to own that, to say, yeah, I made that choice, because I think, well, you did make that choice. So there's another thing I'm kind of curious about in terms of identifying or looking what you look for in a therapist. And so we're backtracking a little bit. But how important do you think it is that someone finds a therapist with a shared values?
Okay. So this is a good, I guess, point of clarification in the opposite direction. If you ever have a therapist who you feel is trying to push you toward a decision or, some way of handling a problem that doesn't fit your values, that therapist is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Which is honoring your autonomy and your values and things like that. So I think sometimes that's the fear, right? Is like, if I find somebody who doesn't share my values, they are going to counsel me in a very different direction. And I think that does happen in subtle ways, right? Where there are people who might say like, divorce isn't an option for me. And then the therapist might be like, that's an unhealthy way of viewing it, and and kind of working against you. And you're not going to work well with somebody who you feel like is trying to, push you in a certain direction. Or the reverse, right? Where it's like, I'm totally fine with divorce, but this therapist keeps like making me feel bad for even talking about it, and not really like helping me explore what's going on for me. So I think that maybe that's why, like I said, people try to align with a specific set of values. I think the big gain from having somebody with like either shared values, shared background, shared ethnicity, culture, any number of factors, is it's just like, I just feel like I'm not even gonna have to say it and you'll get it.
Yep.
Right. And there's a comfort in that. I'm not going to have to explain things and then wonder what you think about it and how you're going to treat it. I don't think it's in and of itself necessarily an absolutely necessary ingredient, but it's like one of those critical ingredients in the big important factor of like my relationship with my therapist. That's the thing that, look at all the research on what makes therapy work, at least in terms of what happens in the room. And it is your relationship with your therapist. The approach they use, the, training they've had, all of that stuff is important. But yeah, can I relate to you probably is a bigger, I think the bigger question people are asking there.
And that's like, someone asked me that once, and my response was, look, if the therapist is doing their job, you won't know.
Yeah.
Like, I should be able to sit across from, and we've done it. We've all done it. We've sat across from someone who maybe doesn't, like, they do things that run counter to our belief system or our value system.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we can still work with that and still figure out like, all right, well, where do you want to go? And so it doesn't matter that I don't agree with you. That's not an ethical requirement of engaging in therapy, is that we share a same value system.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, I think everything you said, I thought was perfect. Like there's benefits to it and there's reasons for it. But looking at, right, like, are they going to push me in a direction I'm not comfortable going? Welcome back, Rob.
It'll last like 30 seconds. Keep going.
Well, actually, now that you're here, maybe we should recap real fast and then you can do our send off.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So basically we're saying, like, find somebody who you feel comfortable hanging out with, can relate to, and who has the appropriate training to help you with whatever you're dealing with. And then when you're in the room, your biggest gains are going to be in, like, de-escalating and looking at yourself. And if you do that together, right, and the therapist is, like, trying their hardest to be open with you about their relationship with you and facilitating more and more understanding and closeness between you and your partner, that's the goal. You don't want a therapist who is basically just doing individual therapy with your partner in the room.
Which I've seen. Like, I've watched people.
And I think that's the default mode sometimes for people who haven't had a lot of experience facilitating interactions between couples, because that's really where the bonding happens. That's where the connection and the healing happens. It's like, my relationship's only important in so much as I can facilitate closeness between you.
Yeah.
Right. If it's just like you feel closer to me afterward and I've, like, validated you in opposite directions, then you're going to leave here and be like, well, we need to go back, because we can't do this on our own. We can't talk on our own, but we seem to do it when we're in the therapist's office, right? Over time, I mean, obviously, like, at the beginning, that's how it goes. But over time, you should see, like, oh, this is working outside the room. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, some of what I would consider to be my most successful sessions of couples therapy are the ones where I tend to do the least amount of talking, because I'm watching them, do these things that we've talked about and that we've encouraged and done. And I'm watching it happen between them. I'm like, well, great. Like, I'll jump in every now and then, but you guys are like, this is the kind of thing you should be doing outside my office.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to frame it. It's like, as soon as I start to feel like I shouldn't be here anymore, that's when we're done.
Yeah.
Not you as the couple, but the therapist, and you kind of wondering, why is this guy here? We're doing fine.
Yeah. So
I couldn't have said it better myself. So catch us next time on the Manspace. Hurry, Rob, before your internet runs out.
Oh, man.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Please remember to
rate
and
review.
Please, we desperately need it.